On August 14th, an oil pipeline was blown up in Moscow.
Holy shit!
Unbelievable!
Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack from Ukrainian drones and missiles.
No, there is absolutely no fucking...
Oil refineries have been blown up. Muscovites are in a panic.
Fuck, something just blew up hard as hell over there.
It's fucked! Oh my god!
Muscovites are weeping.
God help us. Crying. I've got an explosion, you idiot.
Ahaha, what do we do?
Oh my god!
Running.
It's flying. Fuck, it's flying, damn it.
And the drones just keep coming and coming.
Ooh.
Aye aye. A series of drone attacks. The Druzhba oil pipeline is burning, the largest artery in Europe, pumping millions of tons of oil.
Our bitumen plant is on fire, fuck, in Gumbonero.
Oil refineries are burning in Bryansk, Volgograd, and Krasnodar Krai. The helium plant in Orenburg has been destroyed.
It's fucked.
Look! Just 3 drones went in there, can you imagine?
And one of them hit dead on. What do you mean it's fucked?
The plant is fucked, it's done for.
If it blows up now, it's going to go off. Crimea is without the Scala M radar. Tatarstan is without Shahed drone depots. Rail and air traffic are in collapse.
Oh my goodness. They have indeed absolutely struck the oil refinery. They have truly quite hit it. Damn it all.
This is fucked! The plant is on fire!
Wave friends, it's August 14th and we have sensational news. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. Crimea has lost an important radar. Everything is burning there. Tatarstan is without its Iranian drone storage. Russia is stopping gasoline exports. Up to 15% of oil refining has been destroyed. Strikes all across Russia. The infrastructure is paralyzed and the Rashists, Muscovites, and people in St. Petersburg are just out of their minds.
It's just a total shit show over there.
Fuck, it's like arrivals. I just woke up because of a sudden loud bang.
We all jump up. I say, what's going on?
Dima says, Irina, they're bombing.
We just opened the balcony and look, it's right next to the house. The house is shaking.
There's an oil refinery right next to the house.
Oh my god, it's so terrifying.
Drones are turning the Druzhba oil pumping station in Bryansk into a blazing inferno. Oil refineries are burning in the Moscow region, Volgograd, Krasnodar Krai, and Slavyansk on Kuban. There are powerful explosions in Crimea, with more than 100 drones attacking the peninsula.
Guys! It's a drone attack!
We were just sitting here on the shore.
Let's go, hurry up. And basically, it flew right between us.
Quick to the fishing line.
Oh, shit, faster! Again.
Second one, second one, second one, second one.
Oh my god!
They're jamming the signal. Mobile internet and a powerful Russian Scala M radar has been destroyed there. Everything's on fire.
Ah! Siren, that's it.
Let's go.
We're leaving! We're leaving!
We fucking came to the sea.
Tatarstan is on fire. The Shaheds stored there have been destroyed. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. We'll discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan right now. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, well, it's true, we're starting to strike very intensively now. So we have destroyed or severely damaged the helium plant in Orenburg. This is the only facility in Russia that produces a critical component for missiles. How much could this impact the Russian missile program and their defense industry?
Well, it will definitely reduce production, although they do have a sufficient number of laboratories where helium can be produced, including on an industrial scale. That is, they can now switch over if there is a certain critical shortage specifically of helium. But there's another point here. This plant processed 15 billion cubic meters of gas per year. That's the main thing. In other words, an attempt to shut down the gas processing plant, if it succeeds, and I think if not the first time, then the second, it will make it possible to expect that the Russians will at the very least have to shut down their gas wells. They simply won't have anywhere to put the gas. What does 15 billion cubic meters mean? Ukraine consumes 15 billion cubic meters for its own needs. That's as of now. We used to go up to 20 when everything was running at full capacity, but right now we consume about 15 billion cubic meters. So that's the consumption of an entire country by a single plant. If you strike it, then at the very least, first of all, they don't receive a certain amount of oil, gas, dollars, the so-called oil currency. It's an economic blow, a hit to the economy. And secondly, with nowhere to put the gas, they'll have to shut down the wells. And a shut-in well, it typically takes several years to successfully reopen it, or you are compelled to flare it. However, if you continue to flare it for an extended period, the well itself ultimately gets permanently destroyed. So here, I would even say it's a triple blow at once against the Russian economy, the military sector, and technological aspects, especially regarding the transfer and involvement of certain services in the placement of this gas. In other words, the right approach is when intelligence is at work. I always say when intelligence selects a target for itself and makes sure no one else interferes, they pick out these key points that, if destroyed, either halt the entire technological production cycle or deliver several blows in different directions at once, like with this helium plant. And where is it exactly? All the way near Kazakhstan, not far from there. Well, by those standards at least. So they managed to reach it.
Roman Grigorievich, the attack on the Druzhba oil pumping station. The largest oil pipeline hub near Bryansk is on fire. And can we say, as you always put it, that this marks the beginning of a systemic collapse of Russia's oil infrastructure? We're making a concerted effort to strike.
Well, we can already talk about it because over the past 2 weeks, there have been specifically systematic, and that's very important, systematic strikes on Russian oil pumping, oil refining, and the oil and gas sector. The reason I emphasize the strike on what seemed to be a helium plant is that in reality, it's a strike on gas processing, 15 billion cubic meters. Plus the most recent strikes, if we list them, for example, the Novokuybishevsk, Ryazan, Afipsky, Saratov, and Ukhta oil refineries. And so there were strikes. On Wednesday, there were strikes on the Novoshakhtinsk and Volgograd oil refineries. So this is definitely systematic now. Plus the strike on Unecha. Remember how many years we've been talking about Unecha? Well, so Unecha is already 40 kilometers from the main oil pumping station. Unecha on the Druzhba pipeline, it's called the Druzhba pipeline. Yes, that's in the Bryansk region. And the oil that's pumped is mainly from Tatarstan. The Druzhba pipeline is mostly Tatar oil. 300,000 barrels of oil pass through Unecha every day. That's $18 million. Every day, the Russian economy receives this amount from selling that oil. Then the oil moves on. And after Unecha, there's Mamai nearby. Mamai is another pumping station. After that, the oil splits off into branches. That is, the pipeline goes to Ust-Luga near St. Petersburg, where the Russian so-called shadow fleet, the tanker fleet, is loaded. Part of the pipeline goes to Belarus, branching again to the Naftan refinery, the Belarusian oil refinery, and to the Mozyr refinery. From Mozyr, the pipeline branches off again, going to Poland and to Germany. All of this is oil. All of it goes through Unecha, which we struck today. And part of the pipeline, now carrying refined oil as diesel, consists of two pipelines, a diesel product pipeline and the Druzhba oil pipeline that go through Ukraine, which we pump to Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. But the Czechs have already refused Russian oil. They have brought in Italian oil and abandoned the pipeline. So there is this trend of rejecting Russian oil. Nevertheless, a strike, meaning a strike on Unecha, would practically shut down this entire cluster. If we finish off Unecha, the first time we struck it during this campaign was on August 6th. Well, it was unsuccessful, as I understand it, because there was no confirmation of a fire there or anything, but although the technological cycle for oil chemical analysis checks was established. Was it today's strike or yesterday's, right? So you could say that this strike has already inflicted some damage, but not far, about 40 kilometers away. In other words, if they've started, believe me, it will burn. Unecha will burn. But in order to completely stop the oil flow, you need to destroy 3 consecutive oil pumping stations. So we need to work on Mamayev, basically starting from Stalnoy Koni. If you remember, we talked about this 6 months ago. Stalnoy Koni is over there, past Bryansk. Stalnoy Koni, Desna, Unecha, and around Mamayev. All of these need to be taken out. And then it will be possible to completely stop the oil flow through the Druzhba pipeline. I think that's exactly what will happen. So we do have the opportunity. The main thing is that our hands aren't tied by various mechanisms like they were at the beginning of the year, when, by the way, we started with that same Unecha. There were good strikes on Unecha, Stalnoy Koni, and Desna on Unecha in particular, somewhere around February or March. But then in March we were stopped.
Roman Grigorievich, based on your analysis, the strikes on the oil refineries in Volgograd, in Krasnodar Krai, in Slavyansk on Kuban, and the simultaneous attacks across all these regions. Roman Grigorievich, what does this indicate, and to what extent can we really target the fuel market and military supplies in Russia? So how will these strikes specifically affect the fuel market and military supplies in Russia?
Well, I've already mentioned them. All 7 of these Russian oil refineries are million-ton plants. The Russians have about 30 of these million-ton plants, maybe a little more than 30, but not many in total. There are another 50 small ones, but those are insignificant, to be honest. They're more like moonshine stills. The real million-ton plants number about 30 or 35, and you could say we've already reached 7 of them. That's a quarter, well, a third, a quarter, a fifth, a quarter, depending on which ones are operating and their production volume. We can stop, completely shut down all Russian oil refining. And if oil refining stops, oil production will stop. Halting oil production will lead to shutting down the oil wells. There are thousands of them, but nevertheless, they'll have nowhere to send the oil, so they'll have to shut them down. It can take years to reopen a shut-in well. Sometimes you need that long for everything to settle because there are certain factors related to water injection. Well, that's just the technological cycle. And that's why strikes on oil refining are so important for us. Meaning, if you take out the refineries first, it will hit the Russian economy and lead to the beginning of Russia's collapse. That's the only way to defeat Russia. And naturally, the fuel that was supposed to go to the Russian army simply won't get there. It won't be produced. Strikes on plants that produce aviation kerosene are especially important. By the way, the first 2 plants, Novokuybishevsky and Ryazansky, they produce aviation kerosene, or rather, they used to produce aviation kerosene. And so the strikes were correct. In other words, the targets were chosen correctly. The main thing going forward is not to stop, so that now in the near future, all those people, all that rabble, who are trying to tie the hands of our armed forces in dismantling the Russian Empire, don't force us to stop striking the oil refineries by pushing for some kind of air ceasefire or something else. If this kind of work continues for half a year, just look, in 2 weeks, 7 oil refineries. By the end of the year, the Russians won't have a single one left, and we'll reach the Omsk refinery too, if we've already hit the Orenburg one near Kazakhstan. Believe me, we have a lot of Kazakh acquaintances who will at least help us get to the Omsk refinery as well. Omsk is the largest. It processes 21 million tons per year.
Roman Grigorievich, in August, the Russian government banned the export of petroleum products because of Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries.
That's right. Again, it's a double blow. First, what did the ban on gasoline exports lead to? To a decrease in foreign currency earnings for the Russian economy. A blow? Of course, it's a blow. It seems that only 2 plants were hit at that time, Novokuybishevsky and Ryazansky, and they immediately made the decision because Novokuybishevsky processes 7 million tons per year. Ryazansky processes about 15 to 17 million tons. So basically, that's like one Omsk refinery, like one big Russian plant. Naturally, this shortage was immediately felt. And why is the shortage felt even more? Because the movement of the Russian army began. An army on the move consumes a huge amount of fuel. Naturally, there isn't enough. Either the army won't have enough, or it's harvest season, so for the harvest or for private, or rather for the civilian population. Naturally, it was necessary to make the decision to restrict gasoline exports, and immediately gasoline prices started to rise. At least on the markets, on those big markets, on the wholesale markets. And this is already an indicator that there is a real gasoline shortage, and it will definitely continue in the future. Moreover, it is precisely the gasoline shortage that could lead to serious stagnation of the Russian economy through inflation. Because, well, 50 and sometimes even 70% of the price of Russian goods is actually the cost of delivery. In other words, the price of gasoline itself. Naturally, if gasoline starts getting more expensive, then consumer goods for Russians will also start to rise in price. And Russians live by their TV and their refrigerator. And then this herd, if they open the fridge and find nothing there, just a fig with poppy seeds. Well, poppy seeds are closer, obviously. They'll look at that fig and start mooing. And not just mooing, they'll start looking for horns somewhere, to butt heads. This is a big problem for Putin. In fact, that's what he fears most, when this Russian mooing, bleating herd starts looking for something to eat, because their salaries just aren't enough to fill the fridge. You can't really feed yourself with the TV. You can only feed your brain, but your stomach has nothing to do with the TV.
Roman Grigorievich, last night more than 100 drones attacked occupied Crimea. There is information that the Scala M radar in Crimea was destroyed. This means the loss of the ability to control up to 350 kilometers of airspace. And what does this now mean for the defense of occupied Crimea and the use of Russian aviation, Roman Grigorievich?
Well, there's not just one radar there. These are radars of the enemy's radio technical troops, and about 3 to 5 of them are destroyed every week, that's for sure. So on one hand, there is a systematic clearing of Crimea going on, and on the other hand, there's also an interesting action being carried out. After we destroy the radars, the Russians take those radars and surface-to-air missile systems, say from some oil refinery, and transfer them to Crimea. Crimea is their priority. And naturally, you don't have to run all over Russia destroying every SAM system. You can just focus on Crimea. They'll bring them there themselves, just like in Chornobyivka. So basically, it's like a big Chornobyivka. How many times was it? 30 strikes on new deployments on the Russians, on Russian troops in Chornobyivka. That's what these strikes are like. It's exactly the same picture here in Crimea. You can focus on destroying the entire enemy air defense through Crimea. They'll bring it there themselves, leave their rear exposed, but they'll try to protect Crimea, the Kerch Bridge. So today's strike on Crimea, which we're talking about now, is exactly one of those attacks. And it was a large-scale one. After all, it wasn't just the radar that was hit. The strikes were mainly carried out on Feodosia, on the Kerch Bridge, and in the area around the Kerch Bridge, and on the port Kavkaz, which is next to the Kerch Bridge. This port is used, first of all, for pumping fuel into Crimea. There are pumps there. And of course, for the railroad ferries that also go to Crimea. They are loaded at Kavkaz, then travel along the route and are unloaded further on in the area of Kerch. So this was a massive strike on Crimea. I think within a day, the General Staff will confirm it after decoding the active monitoring data, or at least the synths will show where the strikes were delivered. But the strike was serious. In other words, the strike targeted Feodosia, some military facilities, and Port Kavkaz.
Roman Grigorievich, today I watched a report related to occupied Crimea, and it said that the Gauleiters, the occupiers, the occupation authorities have announced that now there will be no mobile service or internet at all in the occupied territory of Crimea for a very long time. This was done so that they could fight against the drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. So right now they've shut down mobile service and internet on the occupied peninsula. What does this indicate?
They're afraid. So right now, at this moment, why are they doing this? Well, from a military logic standpoint, that's exactly how it is. Why is that? Because there is a certain protocol for protecting high-risk, so-called high-risk facilities, like, for example, the Kerch Bridge. In order to fully secure, say, from reconnaissance to reconnaissance adjustment, all communications at any level are shut down. They are waiting ahead on Friday for the meeting for this Trump and Putin get-together in Alaska, expecting a serious strike on the Kerch Bridge. Can you imagine how Putin and Trump will be hugging each other, right? Putin will probably be put on a little bench like a schoolboy so he can reach Trump. So how are they going to be hugging there if at that very moment there's an attack on the Kerch Bridge or the Kerch Bridge is on fire? Naturally, the highest security protocol for the Kerch Bridge has now been activated and they'll be shutting everything down. Everyone will be marching in formation there on the parade ground for these few days until Friday. And most likely even after Friday until Monday, because they won't be able to go on a bender starting Friday like Russians usually do. So I think they'll stay in this secrecy mode until Monday, well, at least with maximum security measures closing off the Crimean bridge. We'll see. Here's the thing, we don't always use Russian communications either. There are other mechanisms as well.
Roman Grigorievich. The second SBU strike on the Shahid storage facility in Tatarstan. We managed to do it again in just a few days. A repeated hit on the facility 1,300 kilometers from Ukraine. How does this, as of today, demonstrate the capabilities of long-range drones and their strategic impact?
Well, judging by the video, by the way, these are already new drones. These are drones like the same Russian Geran, or say the Iranian Shahed, or the Chinese Sunflower 200. So this is a wing-type drone. That means we have already put into serial production, or at least at their own base, the SBU guys have started producing, by and large, pretty decent drones. The thing is, it's precisely the wing configuration that makes it possible, if there is enough fuel and a good engine, to send this UAV several thousand kilometers. It all depends on the reliability of the engine and the amount of fuel. So we've moved into this area. They've taken the right approach, gone down the right path, because fixed wing drones are, of course, better used at short ranges. At least that's how we use the Bobry, right? Or, for example, those same fierce An-196. So a fixed wing drone is actually quite easy to shoot down. I mean, its speed is lower, although you can get the wing up to pretty good speeds. Eventually, you could even install not just an internal combustion engine, but a turbine as well, without significantly changing the configuration of the aircraft itself. So they were already thinking ahead. And basically, if the SBU got involved in this, believe me, they really know what they're doing in this regard. First of all, when it comes to target designation and carrying out combat missions, as well as the production of this type of drone, they've made significant progress. And as for the fact that the Geran drones are now Russian-Chinese, and because they're Russian-Chinese, they can produce a huge number of them. So what exactly is a Geran? Right now, the Geran is a body cast in Russia. The body is Russian. And the Chinese have already set up a factory in Russia to supply the engine, the internal combustion engine. Actually, the internal combustion engine is still produced in Russia, while the turbines are still made by the Chinese. This is for the Geran 3. Most of the components and assemblies, especially the servos and some control systems, are Chinese. Over 50% of it is Chinese made. And the main control board is produced at VNII Progress. So that's what the Geran is. And now they're producing a lot, about 150 to 200 units per day. Around 100 are used against us, which means they store about 100 in their own warehouses. These warehouses were identified by security services and drones were sent there. The extent of the damage is still unclear, but I think in some time there will be confirmation. But we need to operate even at distances of 300, 1,000 or 1,500 kilometers. These drones can cover such distances. The main thing is to scale up production and keep hitting them constantly. Believe me, this issue can be solved. We can reduce the number of Gerans in the warehouses and eventually we'll get to the production sites because the production itself needs to be taken out and not just in Russia. Because without destroying the production facilities in China, we won't reach a certain level. In the end, even if we destroy all the production in Russia, they'll just move it to China and we'll start bringing in Chinese drones.
Roman Grigorievich, here's some fresh information to confirm what you've just said. Bloomberg writes, the Saratov oil refinery has stopped receiving oil after the latest drone attack. This could affect gasoline supplies. The situation is dire. It belongs to Rosneft. Roman Grigorievich, could you comment on this?
This Saratov plant on the banks of the Volga used to take in 7 million tons of oil. So basically, the Volga divides, it turns out, Saratov into Saratov and Yenisei. On one side to the west is Saratov, and on the left bank to the east is Yenisei. And this plant was right on the bank of the Volga, so naturally it was only a matter of time before we reached it. The main thing was they gave the order when they finally allowed us to strike, as they say. Why it was forbidden before, that's another question. That's Article 111 of the Criminal Code. But after they started striking, naturally Saratov, the Saratov oil refinery, immediately came under attack. And it's not going anywhere. It's been standing there for 90 years. That plant is 90 years old. If I remember correctly, the plant is called creaking. So it was just a matter of time before it got hit. It was hit, the combat mission was accomplished. If I'm not mistaken, the unmanned systems forces carried out the operation, our SBS units. By the way, they also have the An-196, those fierce Antonov drones that delivered the strike. It came to a complete stop. So you could say that now the Russians will have to figure out what to do with at least 7 million tons. And most likely, since they can no longer send this extra oil to foreign markets, they'll start shutting things down. They'll start shutting down the production infrastructure, and there will be a shortage of gasoline. This plant mainly produced gasoline and diesel, and naturally this gasoline and diesel won't reach either the domestic market or the foreign market because it's closed off, nor will it go to the Russian army. Besides, it didn't really supply Moscow that much anyway. To actually disrupt fuel supplies to Moscow and the Moscow region, you'd have to take out 2 more plants. And if you take out a plant, who supplies it? Mainly it's Kapotnya, the Kapotnya oil refinery. It supplies almost half of the gasoline and diesel for Moscow and the Moscow region. And if we do manage to finally take out the Druzhba oil pipeline, shut it down along its entire route, then the Mozyr oil refinery, which was sending the other half of the fuel to Moscow, well, Belarus, the Mozyr oil refinery, was supplying that. So Muscovites, besides not being able to fly out now, won't even be able to leave by other means. I mean, can you imagine spending the velvet season sitting somewhere in Moscow's basements?
Roman Grigorievich, a very important topic. The enemy's offensive, the enemy's advance near Dobropolye, and the threat of encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Let's start with Dobropolye. That's a breakthrough of 15 to 18 kilometers. Kucherov Yar and Zolotoy Kolodets have been captured. At this point, is this a local tactical operation or the beginning of a major enemy offensive?
Well, the thing is, when carrying out the objectives of the first wave, these are, after all, shaping operations. So-called reconnaissance by combat, an attempt to break through the front lines, after which the second wave moves in. The second wave, which is now starting to arrive, we can already see it. Equipment, ammunition, and fresh personnel, so to speak. They can enter the breakthrough if it happens, right? And then they can move into open operational space, and as they say, it's a free-for-all. go wherever you want as far as you can get until, well, you run out of fuel. So the thing is, there is no breakthrough right now, even though everyone keeps saying breakthrough, breakthrough. No, there is no operational breakthrough. What we have is operational seepage through our positions. But why has this operational seepage occurred? Because we don't have enough troop density along the line of contact, especially on the main section from Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka. Well, it's not enough. Everyone understands that perfectly well. Roughly speaking, there should be 3 strong points per kilometer. In other words, a company should be covering 1 kilometer. But sometimes in our case, a company is covering several kilometers and there's just 1 strong point for several kilometers. Naturally, between these platoon strong points, the Russians can slip through in sufficient numbers to then regroup somewhere in the rear and cause trouble at a distance of 10 to 15 kilometers. So that's how they broke through. Not really broke through, no one saw them, they just slipped through. They slipped through and then started causing chaos in the rear, as they say, and Deep State drew a map showing a breakthrough as such. But there was no breakthrough, and at the moment a decision has been made to send reserves there to, well, to plug the gaps in that direction. Now, how long have we been talking about this? We've been talking about this for 3 months. Syrskyi needed to make a decision. He should have made a decision not to run around the Sumy, Kursk, Kharkiv, and Belgorod regions, but to focus on the Eastern Front. Why? Because the main objective for the Russians is to capture the Donetsk region. Naturally, they will put pressure on Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk, because without Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk, they won't be able to get to Dobropilya, and without Dobropilya, they ultimately won't be able to approach from the west toward Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and Druzhkivka. In other words, this operation is obvious. It's right there on the map. And our third line of defense was holding the Russians back quite well until Syrskyi started reducing the troop density. Why did he start reducing it? Let them figure that out themselves. Did the politicians tell him to? Did he come up with it himself, decide to play games with retreat, or just flat out decide to give up Donbass? I don't know why, but based on the inaction, I'll say it again, if we hadn't been talking about this for 3 months, maybe it wouldn't be worth mentioning now. But for almost every broadcast over the past 3 months, we've been saying, in order to hold the Eastern Front, we need to increase troop density by bringing in law enforcement personnel. We say this in every single stream. So what ended up happening? In the end, they did bring in law enforcement, sent the National Guard of Ukraine there, the first corps of the National Guard. Well, that's exactly who law enforcement are. The National Guard is part of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So the Ministry of Internal Affairs on the front line. 300,000, and we only need 100,000 for the armed forces of Ukraine. No questions. There wouldn't be these breakthroughs. Well, it's not really a breakthrough. I'll say it again. It's infiltration. Infiltration that our strong points simply didn't notice. They just didn't see it. And then when they showed up in the rear, that's when they started dealing with these issues. It's roughly the same situation, roughly the same as when you remember Laptia and Aladin, as was once told, when they didn't notice the Ukrainian troops that got into their rear last year in Kursk. This is the same, it was the same kind of tactical infiltration. So what happened with Laptia and Aladin wasn't enough. Our troops slipped through between them along the border line, and then they were simply crushed from the rear. They were pressed and a breakthrough followed. So to prevent such a breakthrough, it's better not to allow it in the first place. That is, immediately increase the troop density along the Donetsk front. The Russians won't launch any more large-scale offensives anywhere else. Nowhere except the Donetsk and part of the Zaporizhia front. Why? Because they need to expand the land corridor. Why is Putin now demanding that we withdraw from the Donetsk direction ourselves?
Roman Grigorievich, you just spoke very concisely, but I would like you to specifically articulate separately for our audience, because this is very important for them, about the threat of encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. So what is the danger for the armed forces of Ukraine in this sector?
If we allow the encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, that is, if they push us out from this direction. After that, they gain what is called operational space, practically all the way to Pavlograd, which is already in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Is there really operational space there? All the way to the Dnipro. That's why, for example, the Poles, the Dnipro, meaning the Dnipro River, because they could advance not only toward Pavlograd or Dnipro, but also toward Kremenchuk, Poltava, basically anywhere on the left bank. It's practically all flatland there. That is the third ridge, the last ridge, the so-called Donetsk ridge, this third line of defense, which our forces are currently holding in the area of Pokrovsk, from Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka. If you let them through, if you let them pass this, then only the Dnipro will stop them. I mean, the Dnipro River. Do you know why the Poles are now building a defense system, and where? On the Vistula, not along the borderline with, say, Belarus or even the Kaliningrad region, because it's flat terrain there as well. The first real barrier is the Vistula. That's why on the western bank of the Vistula. They're building a certain system there, and they're right to do so, by the way. That's exactly the right move. So we can't allow the Russians to break through the third line of defense. Otherwise, we'll have to catch them on the right bank of the Dnipro. They're already milling around near Kherson on the left bank. So, well, it's a very dangerous situation at the moment. And why have we been talking about it for 3 months? It's not just for the sake of talking. Stop running around Sumy and Kursk. Russians aren't going to advance on Sumy and Kiev from the Kursk direction. Don't believe those crazy deputies who've worn their hands down to the elbows digging Kiev's defense system. There's no need to dig trenches around Kiev. They won't make it to Kiev. Pull those deputies back out. Let them pass some laws in the Verkhovna Rada instead. Otherwise, in their foolishness, they'll dig all the way to the center of the earth. They've started digging around Kiev. And now comrades from the military, well, not exactly military, you know what I mean? So there's no need to run anywhere. These are all just flashbangs, so-called diversionary maneuvers. It's the same story in Kharkiv, by the way, and in Kherson as well. But the real pressure from the Russians will be on breaking through the third line of defense, on capturing the Donetsk positions. And that's where they'll be concentrating. That's what Syrskyi needs to be told. I don't know. But again, what does it mean to explain it to him? Do you think he doesn't understand? He's as much of a military man as I am. He understands this perfectly well. Any lieutenant understands this. Anyone who's seen a topographic map, you just look at the elevation map, see the deployment of forces and assets on both sides, and you immediately understand where one side will go and what the other side needs to do. If Syrskyi understands this and isn't doing it, then it means he's not doing it. For some reason of his own, or because of political orders he's receiving from the office. So let them figure it out themselves. But we won't let you surrender Donbas, comrades from the Green Party.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write a few kind words in the comments to support Ukraine and the armed forces of Ukraine. Roman Hryhorovich and I are working for you, for the audience all over the world, so that you know the truth about Russian aggression and Russia's war against Ukraine. The well-known military analyst, Roman Svitan. Roman Hryhorovich, thank you. And as usual, see you this Friday.
Goodbye.